You're listening to Balancing Point. I'm Trevor Filseth, and this is my colleague, Dr. Arman Mahmoudian. So early on Friday morning, the conflict between Israel and Iran, which has been going on in one form or another almost since 1979, but really in earnest since the October 7th attacks in 2023, saw a massive escalation. Israel carried out a multi-pronged attack inside Iran, which it called Operation Rising Lion, in which it heavily damaged Iran's nuclear enrichment plant at Natanz, struck a number of targets in cities across the country, and assassinated key Iranian leaders. Casualties included Hossein Salami, the head of the IRGC, Mohammad Bagheri, the country's senior-most military officer, allegedly Esmail Qani, the commander of the IRGC's Quds Force, and Ali Shamkhani, who was overseeing the ongoing nuclear negotiations with the United States. Now, Iran has struck targets inside, Israel has struck targets inside Iran before. It's bombed Iranian military facilities. It's killed generals. Notably, it assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh at a guest house in Tehran last year. But those attacks were all somewhat more peripheral to the core Iranian leadership than this one. In effect, Netanyahu has seemingly declared a personal war against Supreme Leader Khamenei and his inner circle. And no one's quite sure what's going to happen next. Surely Iran is going to retaliate, but it doesn't seem as though it has many good options for how to do so. And Israel's indicated that it's going to continue doing these strikes on an ongoing basis. So it seems like we're entering the most dangerous phase of the post-October 7th period yet. So here to discuss this, Arman and I are very pleased to be joined by Dr. Sina Azodi, an expert on Iranian politics and foreign policy. Dr. Azodi is a professor of Middle East politics at the George Washington University. He previously worked at Princeton University's program on science and global security and for the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He's widely known as a commentator on Middle East and Gulf issues in both the Western and the Iranian press. He's also the author of the forthcoming book, Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran, and the Nuclear Question. He holds a PhD from the University of South Florida and a BA and MA in International Affairs from the Elliott School of International Affairs at GWU. And we're very pleased to have him here. And with that, Arman, I will turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Sina, for being with us. It's always a pleasure. I want to start, with a question regarding the overview that Trevor kindly and very nicely, outlined. The damage that Israel has done during the last, let's say, 48 hours to Iranian nuclear and ballistic missiles. But before going to the analysis of the depth of the damage and the damage assessment, I just want to ask you a question that. How do you think this happened? It seems Iranian been quite off guard. It seems Israel is relatively still maintaining, if not more, a freedom of maneuver over Iran's aerospace. Iran has been, because we are not talking about a country that didn't see this coming. Iran has been in an almost de facto, in a de facto way, always been on the edge of the military conflict, at least during the last 4 decades. 1 decade of it was a total war with the Iraqs, and after that it was always a level of tension up and down with the United States and with the Israelis themselves. But it seems that the Israelis got the Iranian off guard. They got the Iranian high command off guard. They successfully targeted a good number of the Iranian military commander, a good number of Iran's military sites, be it as a defense, aerial defense size or ballistic size, and a good number of the Iranian nuclear facilities. So to sum up, the question is, how did it happen? What is happening during the last 48 hours?
Well, it's good to be with you, Trevor. It's good to meet you, Arman. Always good to be with you. I agree that Iranians had miscalculated, excuse me, that while they're negotiating with the United States, Israelis will not attack. And this was on Iranian side. This was something that Iranians should have thought about. And I still don't. And my view is that Iranians never expected a large-scale attack of this scope, especially going after the top brass of their military. I think that they would have expected limited attacks, as we have seen before. Assassinations. Israel has a history of assassinating nuclear scientists. They have killed many of them in the past, in 2011, 2012. In fact, one of the nuclear scientists who was assassinated and I forgot his name now. There was a previous attempt on his life. He survived the attack, but this time around he was killed. Or going after the chairman of the Armed Forces General Staff. This is the highest ranking military officer in Iran. And I don't think that Iranians expected this level of audacity by the Israelis. So yes, I agree that they were caught off guard. We also have to keep in mind that the Iranian intelligence has been penetrated by the Israelis. They have many reasons to commit espionage for financial reasons. The Iranian economy is doing bad, so extra money is always good. For ideological reasons, many of them could oppose the Islamic Republic secretly while they work for the Islamic Republic. So they could be blackmailed by the Israeli intelligence. So they have many reasons to commit espionage for the Israelis. Now, in terms of the scale of attack on nuclear facilities, look, what we know so far is that Natanz has been struck twice. Some of the facilities that provided power to centrifuges have been struck by the Israelis, which means that those centrifuges are now not operational anymore. Fordo, my understanding, the latest that I've seen was that Fordo was not attacked, so it is still operational. But we have to keep in mind that, look, once you know how to manufacture a centrifuge, it's only a matter of time that Iranians rebuild those centrifuges. Going back to 2010, 2011, the first incident of large-scale cyber attack in modern history was the Stuxnet that the NSA and the Israelis did, jointly, which took out hundreds, if not thousands, of Iranian IR-1 centrifuges, the first generation centrifuges. But again, they could rebuild them, and within 6 months, they were back on track. And I do want to emphasize that the open source information that the US has provided is that what the Israelis can do at best is to postpone the Iranian nuclear program by 6 to 9 months. They cannot eliminate the program. Only the United States can physically destroy all the facilities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the geography there, if I understand this correct, Natanz is sort of relatively open, so it's fairly easy to bomb it. Fordo is built underneath a mountain, correct? So unless you have some gigantic bomb of the kind that only the United States has, it would be very, very difficult to actually get in there and physically destroy it.
Well, Natanz is also protected. It's underground. But Fordo is even more protected because, as you said, it's in the mountain. Natanz was the first large enrichment facility that Iranians created, and they did it specifically because they anticipated an eventual Israeli attack on their facility. They saw and they learned from the Iraqi and Syrian cases where Israel took both nuclear reactors out, effectively destroying their program. So Iranians learned this, and they said the best option is to protect them underground. Iran is a large country. The territory is hospitable for digging underground. They have a lot of mountains, so they can do all those things, and also to disperse them.
Right. We're going to certainly come back to the nuclear thing shortly. Interestingly, our last podcast guest, I think, was Gary Seymour, and we were talking about sort of the political calculations behind developing a nuclear weapon. Because at this point, the IAEA says, unless I'm mistaken, that Iran has enough enriched uranium to build 3 to 6 nuclear warheads, and I think it's a step short of completion. It's at like 60% when they need to be at like 90%, but it's not a difficult technical step. As long as you have any centrifuges remaining, it's pretty easy to do that. And so that leads to the conclusion that if Iran has so far held off on building a functioning nuclear weapon, it has been for political reasons rather than sort of technical ones. And I'm sure they're gonna rethink that decision shortly. I want to pivot for the time being back to sort of the issue of how this happened in the first place, because the conventional wisdom, and I'm an editor at the National Interest, and we get all this, we get articles about this all the time, was that Iran was keeping a very close eye on what Israel was doing, and also what the U.S. was doing, sort of gathering the bombers at Diego Garcia, preparing for some kind of a strike, and was preparing lots and lots of missile defense, was stockpiling systems, both domestic and buying them from Russia as well. So with that in mind, I mean, how did they miss this? Like, everyone knew this was coming. There were betting odds about it on Polymarket, and yet they seem to have just been humiliated by this.
Is this for me or Armand?
Yeah, sorry, it's for you.
Well, again, as I said, first of all, let me say that the latest IAEA report says that Iran has enough fissile material for 10 nuclear warheads. 10. This is the latest one that came out like a few days ago. If they make the political decision, but we can always discuss that, later. Now, in terms of, as I said, I think Iranians miscalculated that the Israelis will not attack. They also thought that while they negotiate with Donald Trump, the U.S. will not attack, and it will also restrain the Israelis and will stop them. Now, again, this was a miscalculation on Iranians' behalf. I also saw that the Israelis did a nice, you could call it a taken from James Bond movies, that they send a few people on vacation. Benjamin Netanyahu was on a trip, signaling to Iranians that there's no attack coming. But again, Iranians were fooled. They were caught off guard, and they were not prepared for this. This is why you see that in the first 24 hours of the attack, Iranian air defense is practically absent from the field. It is only the second day, yesterday, that you see Iranian air defenses engaging in Israeli projectiles, planes, etc., etc. I've seen reports that are not confirmed, and Israelis have denied it, that the Iranians have shut down Israeli planes. I've seen Iranian news agencies have reported and confirmed that this is their claim, not mine, that they've captured the pilot, and this is by as late as an hour ago. Again, Israelis have denied this, but we don't know yet. So again, Iran was caught off guard, but now they're catching up. But I think Israel has more plans ahead. They started with the nuclear program, decapitating the top brass of the Iranian military. Now they're going, and then last night they went after Iranian air bases. They attacked Hamadan, Shiraz, Tabriz air bases, and I can explain, which aircraft type is stationed in Shiraz. We can discuss it if you like. But now they're going after the oil refineries. And this is a larger plan, which tells me it's a larger plan to disable the country. I heard, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and she had gone to put gas in her car, and apparently they're rationing gas already. I think it is a smart decision, but it tells you that the Iranians are expecting a longer conflict with Israel.
Speaking of the longer conflict, and Israel is broadening, its retaliatory, its offense on Iran's territory. As you said, it started with the military, and now it's getting to the economic infrastructure. Iran has been trying to respond too. I mean, we have seen the Islamic Republic, at least, let's say a couple hours into the attack, 7 to 8 hours into the attack, they seem to be pulled their chest command system a little bit together, has been launching the counteroffensive or retaliatory attacks. Iranian been precisely using, as has been always expected, the projectiles, the aerial projectiles, being as a missile or drones. Tel Aviv seems to be a main target, and some areas also in south of the Israel, central and south of the Israel seems to be the most of the time the targets. However, despite the massive barrage of the missile attacks, which some of them has bypassed the Israelis, aerial defense, but it seems a good number of them hasn't. What now waits for Iran? I mean, but if we want to, if I ask you that about what is Iran's retaliatory plan in your view, do the Iranians have a chance to kind of inflict a level of damage upon the Israelis that pursues them for a ceasefire or stopping the offense? What is Iran's counteroffense plan and what's the direction of it?
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't have access to Iran's war plans. I can just guess. But
the CIA is very curious.
I wish I did, but I don't. But let me take us back for a second to April 2024, when Israel attacks and Iran responds by launching three stages of drones, cruise missiles, and then ballistic missiles. Now, back then, when Iran launched all these missiles, US, Great Britain, France, and Jordan all came together to intercept Iranian missiles. And they were quite successful, but still, and they claim that we've shut down 99% of Iranian missiles, but 99% is not 100%. Some of them reached the Nevatim air base. When I say some, I say one or two, and they hit their target, right? And the interesting point is nobody in the Western media reported this except the Israeli media. It was Haaretz and Times of Israel which reported this, right? And then in the second exchange that Iranians had with the Israelis in October 2024, which, by the way, I thought it's not going to happen, but it did. 30 Iranian missiles reached the Nevatim air base, right? So from maybe a couple to 30 this time around, and I've seen the footage from Tel Aviv that many missiles have reached their targets, right? So one can claim that, yes, Iran has been humiliated, etc., etc. I say Iran has been caught off guard. But the response, when you compare it from 1 to 30, and then many of them reaching their destination, I think it tells us that Iranians have learned and adapted their strategy, which makes their strikes more effective. Now, in terms of what is ahead for Iran, it depends on the scale and the fact that how long this conflict will last. If it stops now, I think Iranians will limit themselves to missile strikes. But and again, I hope that this is where it ends, because I fear for civilian casualties in Iran and Israel. But if it continues, my concern is that Iranians view this as an all-out war, and I'm sure they have plans for this. I am sure that the Iranian army, the Artesh, the conventional military, has plans. So far, they've been out of conflict. They have not joined. It's only IRGC that is launching ballistic missiles against Israel. But Iranian army could also get involved, meaning the Artesh could also get involved. Now, Iranian Air Force is an old Air Force, but I think that they still can pull off perhaps one or two strikes against the Israelis. They've done it in the past, and I think they can do it again.
Speaking of how long, I'm very glad that you mentioned, because I have a question actually on that front. So Iran and Israel are not a neighboring country, which means their military strikes is going to be limited mostly to aerial one or a special operation. But on an aerial front, I have a question that Iran's solid fuels storage for the missiles has been damaged. Israel has targeted a couple of them. Iran's ballistic missiles has been damaged. It seems that Israel is growingly paying attention to the other part of the industrial part of Iran's military infrastructure. And Iran is relying on launching barrage of missiles. I mean, it's a game of the number. In order to bypass Israelis or surpass Israelis, the aerial defense, you have to launch a large number. Now, the question is, for how long do you think Iran can actually keep up with this game? I mean, in the absence of the safe production for fuel or missile, is it something that Iran can sustain this level of attack at this rate for a long time, or even for a medium range time?
Well, it depends on the length of the conflict. Again, let me put it this way. The best answers to questions regarding Iran, as I say, are should start with either I don't know or it's complicated. So in this case, I would say I don't know. I don't know how, what is the storage of their, solid fuel missiles or liquid fuel missiles. But look, Iran is a very large country, and hitting factories here and there in Western Iran doesn't mean that Iranian military will be incapable of mastering an attack. Sure, it will limit Iran's capacity to respond, but we have to keep in mind that Iran is a very large country. It can take a lot of punishment simply because of its size compared to Israel. And ironically, Iranian politicians have pointed out to this, that even if we get nuked, we're still a large country and we can survive, right? And they've said it. Hashemi Rafsanjani pointed out to this in early 2000s, that even if the enemy, and they're referring to Israel, if they use nuclear weapons against us, we're a large country and we can survive. So again, the best answer that I have for you is I don't know. I don't know how long they can do this, but again, I am sure that they have war plans.
I thought it was interesting that on the first night of the attacks, when Bibi Netanyahu was talking about them, he said something which was very unusual, which was he actively told the Israelis, you're going to need to be spending a lot of time in bomb shelters, for the next weeks or months. And whether or not this turns into sort of a full-blown conflict, and it seems as though it will, it looks as though Israel thinks that it will. And by saying, okay, time to hit the bomb shelters, guys, it's almost sort of a tacit admission that, well, the Iron Dome is only going to take us so far. There is going to be retaliation for this, and we can't stop that. So we need to do what we can to minimize it.
Sure. And can I just add one quick point? Right now, as we speak, Iran is fighting the Israeli air defense system and the U.S. assistance to Israel's air defense system. So it's kind of a 2-against-1 game at this point.
Right. Obviously, with the caveat that you're not in the IRGC and you don't know this for certain.
Well, some people have argued that I've infiltrated Iranian American academia on behalf of IRGC, and I've been paid $1 billion.
Amazing. Share some of it with us, please.
If I have $1 billion, I'd be speaking to you from Hawaii or somewhere.
I think your backdrop would look much more impressive. Can you walk us through some of the other ways that Iran might respond? So in addition to missile attacks, which I think everyone sort of understands, Iran has spent a lot of time over the last decades thinking about irregular warfare, asymmetric warfare, against the United States. So what else might they do? Might they close the Strait of Hormuz? Might they, target U.S. military bases in the region? What are some of their options here?
Well, closing the Strait of Hormuz is certainly an option, and I think Esmail Kosari pointed out this morning, Tehran's time, that it should be on the list. But I don't think that they've reached that point. And I believe that as long as the U.S. stays out of the fight, they will not do that, because it harms their own interests too. And should they choose to close the Strait of Hormuz, which they have the capacity to do so, the U.S. will intervene to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz, which means that they have to fight the United States at the same time. And this is something that they've tried to avoid. They could do it for a very short period of time to give a shock to the oil market and brag about it. They could start attacking oil tankers in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz just to, again, give a shock to oil markets. But I also think that there are a few options that they have. they could ask the Houthis to restart their attacks on Israeli interests in Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea. Yes, the Houthis have reached their own ceasefire with the United States, but they didn't sign a ceasefire with the Israelis, so they could restart that. But what I've been thinking about, and Arman and I were talking, have talked about this a few times, that Iranian Air Force is, again, very old. But in 1981, Iranians pulled off one of the most daring attacks in the history of aerial warfare. They attacked 3 air bases in western Iraq, which is very close to Israel. Now, this Iranian Air Force, one can claim that is not the same Iranian Air Force of 1981, but I think if they've done it in the past, I think they're still capable of pulling off perhaps a single strike just to show off, attack a few facilities as the Israelis have been attacking Iranian facilities. Again, I don't know. It could be on the list. And as you said, I'm not a member of IRGC or Iranian army, and I don't have access to Iran's war plans. But it could be on the list. If push comes to shove, I'm sure they will consider something like that.
Well, Dr. Azodi, you're not a member of IRGC, hopefully, but you are an expert of Iran's nuclear proliferation. So I want to ask you,
Sure.
about the continuous of the, Iran's response. So some of Iran's responses can be military, which is obviously. Some of them can be covert operation, either against the Israel or across the world against the Israeli interest. Some of the Iranian interest, which was the main concern, has been could be nuclear, not in terms of a nuclear attack, but in terms of shifting the navigation of its nuclear project, or basically triggering the weaponization of it. And you mentioned the Fordos facility seems to be so far unharmed. We don't know how long it's going to last, but seems to be so far unharmed. The first question that I want to ask you, I mean, my question has kind of two stages, is what's the stage of Iran's stockpile? Because it seems the Israelis hasn't made an aim at Iranian's nuclear enriched uranium stockpile. That's what I heard. And please correct me if I'm wrong. And second, what do you think? What are the odds, in your view, that Iran now makes that political decision to trigger a full-scale weaponization of this enrichment? And if let's say that they made the final political decision, do they have the technical capability to pursue it? Because now it seems now we are going on the reverse direction. Yeah.
Well, they do have the technical capacity and know-how of making a bomb. They've done the studies in the past. We know that Iran had a well-structured weaponization program prior to 2003, where they had done most of the studies for putting an implosion device on a missile. We know that they've done this. We know that they can enrich uranium, which, according to Iranian nuclear scientists, it's like 95% of the job, right? So I think, yes, they do have the capacity. Now, the political implication is that in the past few years, there is an unprecedented change in the rhetoric of the Iranian officials. 5 years ago, I would have never thought that on Iran state TV, they would have a debate about the prudence of getting a nuclear weapon. But I've seen repeatedly in the past few years that they're discussing it with the heads of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, the AEOI, claiming that Iran has a capacity to go for the bomb, but it hasn't made a decision. We've also seen that 39 or 32, perhaps, maybe I'm getting the number wrong, have written a letter to Khamenei asking for a change in Iran's nuclear doctrine. Now, these attacks will, I think, will further the position and the strength of those who have been advocating for weaponization. Why? Because, and it's a valid argument, that Israel has nuclear weapons, They have 90 nuclear weapons. They have fissile material for an extra 200 nuclear warheads. They have conventional superiority over Iran. And the only option that deters Israel from attacking Iran is to simply getting the bomb. And all they have to do is to test a bomb to come out as a nuclear weapon state. They don't even need a sophisticated implosion device. They could test a rather simple device that will simply put Iran in the nuclear club, right? So these are the things that Iranians could do. But I'm afraid that these developments will strengthen those voices. There are still people in Iran, like former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, people like Araqchi, or even Salehi, one could make the argument that they are against weaponization. But these developments will strengthen the voices that said, we told you so. We have to get the bomb. So I think it is not unimaginable to see a few months from now, a year from now, there is a consensus, because you also need a consensus to make the political decision, a consensus among the political elite and the military that now it's the time to go for the bomb and risk a potential attack by the United States.
Well, I have a quick question, a little bit take us a little bit earlier to my question. Have you ever traced news about the current state of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile? Have it been eliminated by the Israelis? Because they are in Isfahan, they are not in Natanz, from what I know.
Well, I don't have the numbers, but the latest IAEA report, which I just discussed a few minutes ago, said that Iran has enough enriched uranium for 10 nuclear weapons.
No, I'm not asking about the size and what it can produce, but I'm asking that, do you know that they have been the stockpile has been attacked by the Israelis or eliminated by the Israelis during these raids? Is there any news or report that you have seen?
I don't know, but I don't think you can eliminate this stockpile. Even if you do eliminate this stockpile, which I have not seen any reports, you can stockpile more enriched uranium. And we have to keep in mind that Iran has now the capacity to operate more advanced centrifuges, the IR-6 centrifuges, that can enrich uranium far more efficient and far faster than previous generations, such as IR-1 or IR-2s or IR-2Ms or IR-4s.
Thank you.
So most of the analysis that I've seen, and this is all before the recent strikes, has been that Iran's breakout time, if they chose to kick out the IAEA and just go for broke and developing a nuclear weapon as fast as possible, was in the weeks. You know, it was like something like
10 days.
Right. So obviously that's not a lot of time, and we don't know how the strikes have affected that, but it's probably safe to say it's still roughly the same. If that were to happen, especially within the context of Israel and Iran now being at what appears to be a full-scale war, how do you suppose the United States would react to that? I mean, certainly there would be political pressure on the Trump administration to launch a military strike against it before they could finish it. Do you see this as something that's likely?
That the U.S. would take an action?
Yeah.
Well, let me just say one quick thing. Iran cannot just kick out the inspectors while it is part of it's a member of the NPT. And I will say quickly that one of the options that Iran has is to just withdraw from the NPT, kick out everyone, and just get it over with.
Right, but there's a 60-day waiting period for that, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely, there is. And they could somehow use that 60-day period to negotiate, get some concessions, but this is something that the Iranians have said they could do. Now, in terms of a military response, look, there are voices in Washington, hardcore Republicans, hawks, that have been begging and itching for war with Iran for decades. Lindsey Graham is one of them. Tom Cotton is one of them. Um, I mean, let me just a quick small anecdote. Tom Cotton once complained that Iran is controlling Tehran. I mean, this is how far they're willing to go. And this is a serious comment that he made, like that Iran is controlling Tehran. But I don't think that the president himself and Vice President Vance are interested. I think that Donald Trump has rightfully concluded that the U.S. has to reduce its footprint in the Middle East. Middle East is not a strategic priority for the United States anymore. It is China and it is Russia that the U.S. should be concerned with. And by the way, when you look at the national security strategy document of the first Donald Trump and Biden, they put great power competition that is with Russia and China on the first priority of the United States. Middle East is not there anymore. Terrorism is not there anymore, right? But again, there are voices who are trying to drag the United States with Israel into conflict. Benjamin Netanyahu really likes that. And don't take my word for it. He's been saying it for decades that the U.S. should go and get and take out Iranian nuclear facilities. Donald Trump, to his credit, I have criticized Donald Trump, Armand knows, but I think to his credit, he's understood that getting into war in the Middle East is not in the interest of the United States.
There is another question, and actually Armand and I, we were discussing with this with Dr. Seymour as well. Suppose Iran does successfully develop the nuclear weapon, which is a possibility at this point. Would it actually help them? And the frame of reference I have for this is India and Pakistan.
Right.
And they have a similar adversarial relationship, and both of them have nuclear weapons. Now, there's this ongoing perception, which I think is substantially true, that Pakistan supports terrorism inside India, as seen with this recent Pahalgam attack. And India's repeatedly run up against the barrier that, well, Pakistan does something outrageous, and India gears up to invade, and Pakistan sort of says, we have nuclear weapons, you can't. And accordingly, India is forced to not do anything, or to do something that's very limited. Like you saw this recent conflict. There was an air war, but there was not a ground war. And the threat of Pakistani nuclear weapons use, tactical nuclear weapons use, is a credible enough threat that it deters India from doing what it wants to. So shifting gears to Israel and Iran, obviously there's still a giant taboo on nuclear use anywhere in the world. And there's this understanding that if Iran nukes Israel, certainly that'll be the end of Israel. And then about 90 minutes later, it's going to be the end of Iran as well, whether that comes from an Israeli second strike or from the United States or certainly the outcome after Iran nukes Israel is not going to be good for Iran. So would Iranian nuclear weapons, with this in mind, and Israel knows this, would this really deter Israel from continuing to do conventional attacks on Iran if Iran can't respond with nuclear force without itself being destroyed?
This is a great question, and I love it. So I think, let me say this first. In 2006, the late historian Bernard Lewis argued on August 3rd, 2006, he wrote an article for Wall Street Journal claiming that on August 22nd, 2006, Iran will launch a nuclear first strike on Israel. And we are now why? Because Iranian leadership is a bunch of old crazy mullahs who do not understand deterrence, who don't think like the West, and they're crazy. They want to bring the end of the world. And we're in 2025, almost 2 decades later. That has not happened, fortunately and thankfully. Now, to respond to your question, Look, if Iran gets nuclear weapons, and I agree, they can brandish their nuclear weapons, it will deter the Israelis from attacking Iran. But I think it will push the conflict between Iran and the Israelis into what we call the low intensity conflicts. They poking each other here and there, and then brandishing the nuclear weapons that don't attack me, I don't want to get into a fight, and then use that threat to get the United States to come and stop the war. You mentioned Israel, Pakistan, and India. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is full spectrum, that in response to any invasion, they will resort to nuclear weapons. That's their nuclear posture. And they use this to drag the United States to mediate between Pakistan and India and to stop Indian invasion, because they know that the US does not want an exchange, a war between two nuclear armed states. And as soon as the tensions escalated, we had Secretary Rubio urging two countries to stand down. There were messages being exchanged, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the Pakistani calculation. And I think if Iran gets the bomb, and tensions escalate between, Iran and Israel, they could follow the same path, brandish their nuclear weapons to get the United States to restrain the Israelis from escalating. But what we should expect if Iran gets the bomb is that it will push the conflict between Iran and Israel into back what we had in the past, that is shadow war, attacks against each other's interests with plausible deniability, because none wants to get into conflict. Neither side wants to get into conflict with another nuclear armed state.
Very good. Thank you, Sina. So since we are, getting to the future talks, but we are talking about the distant future, I want to ask you a question which kind of brings us to the finale part of this. What if I want to ask you, and if I ask you that, what do you see the picture for the future picture of this current clash? I mean, what's the get out scenario between Iranian and Israelis right now? Where is it going to end? Do you think it's going to be a long-term one? Do you think it's going to end shortly? What's the way out? What are the ways out? There are probably multiple scenarios. What do you see about it? What do you think about it?
Well, Ehud Barak was on CNN yesterday, and he said that Netanyahu is trying to get the United States to fight Iran. No, his words was that Netanyahu wants to fight Iran to the last American. He wants to drag the United States into a conflict with Iran because he doesn't want to do the fighting on his own. But what the United States should do, and Donald Trump should do, is to put more pressure on the Israelis to stand down, and at the same time, through Iran's friends in the region that are not many, but Omanis, for example, Qataris, for example, Turks, for example, even Iraqis, to ask Iranians to also show a lot of restraint. I think this is the path to peace forward. I think Europeans are simply too weak and irrelevant to do anything. When Israel attacked Iran unprovoked, we had the French president coming and saying that Israel has the right to defend itself. I don't understand what he even means by that, or the Germans. So it's only the United States can do something to first put pressure on Israelis, because we have very good relations with them. Donald Trump has good relations with them. And at the same time, ask the Iranians, and through their friends or even directly, to stand down and de-escalate. This is what Donald Trump can do and should do.
So the way out for you is a mediation by the United States?
This is the only path forward. My concern is that this will be an escalatory conflict. Iranians are not going to back down. They've been attacked. They're not going to back down. I don't think they will.
So there wouldn't be a scenario that either of these sides can escalate its way out of the escalation, meaning by a decisive military gain, make the other party to accept its terms.
I don't think so. I don't think Iranians will submit to an unconditional surrender. We need an exit ramp here, and United States has the capacity to offer both countries an exit ramp. This is what should be done. I don't think that Iranians Iran is a very proud nation. It's a very nationalistic country. I don't think they will accept a national humiliation by signing a surrender document.
Well, yes, I think that's probably right. They're very ominous times ahead, and I hope that the
Very.
United States can play some kind of a role in bringing this to an end that's short of major war. In any case, thank you very much, Dr. Azodi. We're very pleased to have you here. To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to like it and to follow us on social media. Our username is @BalancingPod on Twitter and X. We're going to try and do our next episode towards the end of this month or possibly early July. The topic will be the war in Ukraine, the peace talks, and Ukraine's recent drone attack inside Russia. We've got an amazing guest speaker lined up for that. We'll have more to share soon, so please keep an eye on our social media for updates. Once again, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you, Trevor.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.